All right, we've spent this entire series digging through ancient traditions from all over the world, looking for a pattern for a hidden connection. Well, today is the day. We're putting all the pieces on the board. This is the synthesis, where we finally get to see the full, incredible picture. So let's just dive right in.
You know, it really all comes down to this one single piece of evidence. This table. It's a comparison of 12 different world cultures scored against a 5-part narrative framework. And what you're seeing, it's just a snapshot, but even at a glance, before we even get into the weeds, a pattern starts to emerge that is, well, it's almost impossible to explain away. So before we break down every little detail, let's just stay up here at that 30,000-foot view. Because just by looking at the whole thing, the data shows us two immediate, incredibly powerful patterns.
So here's the first thing that just jumps right out. Across all 12 of these world traditions that we've looked at, not a single one scores 0. Not one. Every single culture, from ancient Sumer to the Americas, holds on to some piece of this 5-part story. The starting point isn't 0, the starting point is a shared memory.
And here's the second thing, and honestly, this is what really dismantles the standard explanations. The traditions that grew up in total isolation, they preserved the framework just as perfectly as the ones that were connected. Just look at the scores. Aboriginal and Native American traditions, we're talking separated by tens of thousands of years. They both score a 4.5 out of 5. That's the same as the Sumerians, and it's actually higher than the Greeks. You know what that tells us? Geography and time, they didn't water down the memory one bit.
Okay, so let's zoom in a little from that high-level view and get a bit more structural. What are the core conclusions that this data is really forcing us to look at?
It really breaks down into 3 key observations. First, like we just saw, nobody scores 0. Every culture is remembering something. Second, isolation just doesn't matter. The pattern is just as strong in Australia as it is in Mesopotamia, which really throws a wrench in the whole "it just spread from one culture to another" idea. And third, and this is the big one, there's a distinctive signature in this pattern. One element that shows up so consistently, it challenges every theory we have.
Let's bring that table back up. Look at that very last column, confined. This is the idea that those divine beings who came down, well, they're gone now, imprisoned or withdrawn, but somehow still here. This very specific detail appears in 9 of the 12 traditions. That's not some generic myth. That's a very specific claim about the state of the world.
And this is exactly where the usual psychological explanations just fall apart. Sure, a sky father or a trickster god, you can kind of see how those broad archetypes could pop up from our shared human psychology, right? But the idea of beings descending, teaching humanity forbidden arts, and then being specifically imprisoned underground, that's not an archetype. That sounds a lot more like the memory of a sequence of events.
So now, let's get even more granular, because buried inside all these stories are these tiny details. Details so precise and so specific, they just defy any explanation based on psychology or cultural drift. We're going to look at 6 of these impossible details, rapid fire.
First up, the dove and the leaf. In Genesis, Noah sends out a dove and it comes back with an olive leaf. That's how he knows the flood is over. Now, go to a completely separate continent, to the Catawba people of North America. They had no contact with the Near East, and they told the exact same story. A dove brings a leaf back to the survivors. This isn't just a shared idea, it's a shared procedural detail. How?
Second, the rainbow covenant. Look, a rainbow is just light refracting through water droplets. It's physics. But in Genesis, it's something more. It's a specific theological sign, a promise from God. Now look at the Lakota tradition in North America. The Creator gives them a rainbow for the exact same reason, as a sign that the Great Flood won't happen again. That's not just a shared symbol, it's a shared theological contract.
Third, let's talk about the Wandjina from Australian Aboriginal tradition. We're talking about a culture isolated for 50,000 years. Their creator beings came from the sky, taught humanity, and then they entered water holes. They now live underground, present, but you can't get to them. I mean, come on. Descent, teaching, confinement, it's the exact sequence of the Watcher story, just spoken in a different cultural language.
Fourth, the Torajan people of Indonesia. They were totally isolated in their highlands until the 20th century, and they state, flat out, that their ancestors came down from the Pleiades star cluster. This is it's stunning, because the Pleiades are the same stars that are hugely significant in both Aboriginal Australian and ancient Near Eastern traditions. 3 separate, isolated cultures, all pointing to the exact same little patch of sky.
Number 5. The forbidden name. In ancient Hebrew tradition, the divine name, YHWH, was so holy you couldn't say it out loud. Now jump half a world away. Aboriginal tradition has the exact same rule for their supreme creator. This identical theological practice, the idea that the creator's name is just unutterable, that's not some universal human instinct. It is a highly specific belief, and it shows up in perfect parallel.
And finally, number 6, the divine curriculum. The knowledge these beings brought wasn't just some vague, fuzzy wisdom. It was specific. It was categorized. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch taught a numbered list of arts and sciences. The Lakota's white buffalo calf woman brought exactly 7 sacred rituals. The Torajan ancestors brought a whole social and religious order down from the sky. This idea of a divine course syllabus is yet another one of these super specific details that just keeps appearing across totally unconnected cultures.
So, after all of this, after seeing the big patterns from up high and these impossibly specific details down low, we have to land the plane. What does all of this evidence actually prove? What does it establish?
This is the million-dollar question, right? And to answer it, we have to be really precise and, intellectually honest.
So let's start with what it does not prove. This data doesn't prove that every single word of the Book of Enoch is literal chapter and verse history. It doesn't prove the flood covered the entire globe. And it absolutely does not answer every single theological question that these traditions raise. If we claim that, we'd be going way beyond what the evidence actually supports.
But here's what the evidence does establish, and it establishes it with real force. The simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest leaps of faith, is that these traditions are not all inventing the same story because all humans have the same kind of brain. No, they are preserving fragments of the same story because they share a common memory of real historical events.
And that brings us to the final argument, the central thesis of this entire series.
The stories are the same, not because all humans think the same thoughts, but because all humans once knew the same events. These parallels aren't just archetypal, they're historical.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought. If this shared memory is real, if it's a faded echo of things that actually happened, then we have to take the central claim of that memory seriously too. The prison is real, and the sentence was always temporary.